because it is so creative. Okay, Oanh, that's good. Okay, what else?
And we think that is also make also create a good image to everyone who seen it.
Okay. Okay, so that is maybe most of you think that Land Rover is maybe preferable because it is more creative. Maybe we think that it is maybe we say that more productive to the consumers. Haha. Okay, so that is maybe the first and the second questions. Now let's focus on the third questions. That is the questions here. How is the advertising industry regulated in your country, and what kinds of product or services cannot be advertised? Okay, now I would like to maybe listen to other group to share your opinions. Okay, now Ngọc Ánh. So erase your hand. So Tabi.
Yes, I'm Nguyễn Thị Ngọc Ánh and I come from groups protein. According to my group, the product advertising industry banned advertise fake goods, do not advertise things related to trade secrets, and bans advertising that are racial or ethnically discriminatory, and ban advertise and ban prohibition of advertisement that are contrary to price custom. And some Thai product cannot be advertised like the violent weapons, narcotics, something like that.
Okay. So Ngọc Anh, tell me, so it means that maybe the toxic product, or maybe we say that too violent image, or maybe the content is not appropriate with the children. So that is maybe the way that the advertising industry is regulated in Vietnam. Now, so Ngọc Anh, can you tell me more about the product or services that cannot be advertised in Vietnam? So tell me, what kind of product or services that cannot be advertised in Vietnam?
I think is violent weapons.
Violent weapons, okay. What else?
Narcotics.
Okay.
And cigarette.
Cigarette, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what about beer and alcohol? So is that prohibited, or maybe it is allowed to advertise in Vietnam? So what about alcohol and beer? The alcohol drinking, is that allowed to advertise in Vietnam or not?
Not.
It is not allowed in Vietnam. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Ngọc Anh. So I think that maybe the regulation of advertising industry in Vietnam is quite similar to other regulation in different countries. It means that maybe most of the advertisement maybe is required not contain too violent image, inappropriate, maybe educational content, or maybe something that is not suitable with the kids, and then maybe some kinds of product or services, for example cigarettes, maybe alcohol, maybe weapon, and other things, some kind of toxic drug are not allowed to advertise in Vietnam. Okay, so that is maybe for the speaking discussion. Now let's come to the matching. So can you look at the words in column A and the words in column B, and then in 2 minutes, can you do the matching for me first? Now let's do the matching for me first. Okay, so now tell me your answer. What is the matching here? Okay, yes, Khoa Đăng.
Em nói là mass về cái mass
Mass with
access,
okay.
mass access, information technology,
Okay, information technology.
product demonstration,
Good. Product demonstration.
consumer electronics,
Okay, good. Consumer electronics.
growth market,
Growth market.
internet development.
Internet development. Okay,
Last
and
one
we
is
have
computer programmer.
Okay, computer programmer. Okay, so thank you, Khoa Đăng. Okay, so that is Đang's matching. Now the whole class, do you agree with him? Now the whole class, do you agree with his idea? So do you think that we have all the correct answer?
I think internet should be matching with access.
Internet matching with access. And then? So internet matching with access, and then? What about the other one?
I think mass should be connected with market.
Okay, Dương said that mass with market. Okay.
I think it's consumer market.
Consumer market. Okay, Cường said that consumer. Okay, consumer market. Okay. Consumer market, and then? Now, so tell me, consumer market. Okay. Now let's check your answer, right? So I think that maybe we have firstly we have product demonstration. I think that product demonstration is correct one. We have information technology. Also, okay, so it's correct one. We have consumer electronics. Okay, mình gọi là các cái sản phẩm điện tử gia dụng hoặc dân dụng, đúng không? Like a TV, microwave oven, washing machine, a smartphone. So all kind of them, the devices, so they are called consumer electronics. And we also have the computer programmer, correct one. And now we have development, we have access, and we have market, and we have the rest that is the mass. Mình còn từ gì nhỉ? Mass này, mình còn từ growth này, và mình còn từ gì nữa các em? Mình còn từ internet, right? Ok, rồi. Vậy là bây giờ mình còn từ mass, growth và internet, và mình còn 3 từ còn lại bên này, đó là development, access và market. Nào, bây giờ mình sẽ cùng match và 3 từ này với nhau nhá, xem cái gì đi với cái gì này. Mình có mass market, thị trường hàng loạt này. Mình cũng có thể có growth market, thị trường đang phát triển này. Mình có internet development, là sự phát triển của internet, và mình cũng có thể có internet access, tiếp cận về mặt internet này. Mình có từ, ngoài ra thì cái từ mass này người ta hay có từ mass produce hoặc là mass production, tức là sản xuất hàng loạt. Và như vậy là với từ mass mình cũng có thể đi kèm nó với mass market, đó là thị trường hàng loạt. Đấy là những cái cách mà mình có thể ghép khác nhau giữa ba từ này. Okay, right. So that is for the matching. Now let's come to the career skill with me. So in this career, we will know how to practice the technique of storytelling. So when we want to tell a story, what should we do? So in fact, when we want to tell a story, maybe we usually want to do the following thing. The first one is to give a shortened version because sometimes the story that we want to tell is too long. So that's why we have to give a shortened version or we have to cut it short. And then maybe we have to talk about the outcome. And sometimes when the story has critical moments, so maybe we want to get our audience or listener to anticipate, and then we also have to focus on a critical moment. And in order to maybe apply all the techniques here, we have to look at the phrases here. So we have the phrases from A to H. So could you please maybe match the phrases from A to H to the techniques that we have on the slide from number 1 to number 4 first. So 1 minute for you to do the matching. Okay, now Thi Dương, can you do the matching for me?
F and D will be number 4.
Okay, I'm sorry, F and D will be number 4. F and D, so number 4 here. F at that very moment. Okay, good. Focus on a critical moment. Okay.
H and B will be number 3.
Number 3, H and B. So you will never believe this. So that is number 3.
So C and G will be number 1, and the rest will be number 2.
Okay. C and D will be number 1. To cut a long story short.
C and G.
C and Z. Okay. Number 1, and the rest will be number 2. Is that right? Okay, that's good. Thank you, Dương. So in fact, that is maybe phrases that if we want to apply the following techniques when we tell a story. For example, if we want to talk about the outcome, we say, in the end, it turned out that, okay. When we want to get the audience to anticipate, maybe we use, you will never believe this. Or maybe you say, guess what happened next? Okay, so that is the way to tell a story. So now let's come to the next so that we will know about the advice for a good storyteller. So when you tell a story, remember to do the following. The first one is to set the scene. The second one is describe the people who are involved, describe the sequence of events, explain how the story ended, and remember that not speak too fast and pause at the critical moments in your story. Okay. Okay. So now let's listen and then tell me, does the man in the listening follow the advice above or not? Tell me, does he follow the advice above or not? So let's listen.
Unit 6. Listening 2. Page 55. 1.
Max Schling lived in New York. He opened a flower shop there. To publicize his business, he ran an advert in the New York Times. It was in shorthand. Some bosses asked their secretaries to translate it. They told them that it said, "Remember Max Schling Flowers."
Okay, now listen again the second time.
Unit 6. Listening 2. Page 55. 1.
Max Schling lived in New York. He opened a flower shop there. To publicize his business, he ran an advert in the New York Times. It was in shorthand. Some bosses asked their secretaries to translate it. They told them that it said, "Remember Max Schling Flowers."
Okay, now so tell me, does he follow the advice or not? Okay, so Phương Thảo.
In my opinion, that he does.
He does. Okay, so it means that if we listen to him, so we know about the scene, we know about the people who are involved, we know about the sequence of events.
Yes, I
Yeah, are you
think so.
sure? You think so? Okay. Okay, so thank you, Thảo. Now the other people, so do you agree with Phương Thảo or you have different ideas? Okay, now Minh Đức.
I disagree with her opinion. I couldn't catch on with what he was saying. He did set the scene. He describes the guy who opened a flower shop in New York. He described the people. He didn't describe the sequence of events, and it ended too fast. And there were no critical moments in his story whatsoever.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Minh Đức. So in fact, I think that the man didn't follow the advice above because if we listen to that, it seemed to be very difficult to distinguish the people who are involved in the story. We don't know clearly about the scene, and he didn't describe the sequence of events in a correct way. So if we want to follow the advice, let's come to the next. So listen to another speaker telling a different story, and then answer the questions from number 1 to number 4. Who is the main character in the story? Where or when does the story take place? What is the sequence of events and what happens at the end? So now let's listen.
2.
One of the best stories I ever heard about advertising is about Max Schling, who was a New York florist. Now, this was back in the 1920s, and Max had just started his business and was looking for a good way to publicize it. And then one day he had this brilliant idea. He ran an ad in the New York Times, only it wasn't like any of the other ads in the paper because it was all in shorthand, which is an abbreviated language that people like secretaries use to take notes. Well, of course, none of the businessmen who'd bought the paper could read shorthand, so they had no idea what the ad actually said. Guess what happened? As soon as they arrived at work, they asked their secretaries to translate it. And what did it say? Remember Max Schling Flowers. Next time the boss wants to send flowers to his wife. Now for me, that was one smart advertisement. And in the end, Schling went on to become one of the most famous flower businesses in New York.
Okay, now listen once again the second time before we can answer all the questions.
2.
One of the best stories I ever heard about advertising is about Max Schling, who was a New York florist. Now, this was back in the 1920s, and Max had just started his business and was looking for a good way to publicize it. And then one day he had this brilliant idea. He ran an ad in the New York Times, only it wasn't like any of the other ads in the paper because it was all in shorthand, which is an abbreviated language that people like secretaries use to take notes. Well, of course, none of the businessmen who'd bought the paper could read shorthand, so they had no idea what the ad actually said. Guess what happened? As soon as they arrived at work, they asked their secretaries to translate it. And what did it say? Remember Max Schling flowers. Next time the boss wants to send flowers to his wife. Now for me, that was one smart advertisement. And in the end, Schling went on to become one of the most famous flower businesses in New York.
Okay, now, so tell me who is the main character in the story? Yes, Khoa Đăng. Yes, Đăng.
And the main character in the story is storyteller.
Main character in the story is the storyteller. Are you sure? Let's check with me.
2,
One of the best stories I ever heard about advertising is about Max Schling.
So, once again, so tell me. Now, so tell me what is the main character in the story? So if we listen to the one.
One of the best stories I ever heard about advertising is about Max Schling.
So Ma Schilling. So if we listen to that, we know that he will be the main character in the story. Is that right? So I think that the main character in the story is Ma Schilling. So now let's listen next.
Who was a New York florist. Now, this was back in the 1920s, and Max had just started his business and was looking for a good way to publicize it.
So tell me, when does the story take place? Back to the 2019. So when and where does the story take place?
The story takes place in New York.
The story takes place in the 1920s. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, now, what is the sequence of events? What is the sequence of events? Now, what is the sequence of events? Now, what is the sequence of events? So tell me, what is the sequence of events?
Can you listen one more time?
Listen again one time. Okay, now listen again.
And then one day he had this brilliant idea. This was back in the 1920s, and Max had just started his business and
So it means that back to the 1920 in New York when he started his florist, right? So the sequence of events begin here.
was looking for a good way to publicize it. And then one day he had this brilliant idea. He ran an ad in the New York Times, only it wasn't like any of the other ads in the paper because it was all in shorthand, which is...
You know the word shorthand? Shorthand? You know the word shorthand? Mình gọi là tốc gì? Tốc ký đúng không? Tốc ký tức là nó sẽ không viết như cái handwriting thông thường của mình mà nó sẽ phải dùng các cái ký tự để mã hóa lại. Okay, now listen next.
An abbreviated language that people like secretaries use to take notes. Well, of course, none of the businessmen who'd bought the paper could read shorthand, so they had no idea what the ad actually said. Guess what happened? As soon as they arrived at work, they asked their secretaries to translate it. And what did it say? Remember Max Schling flowers. Next time the boss wants to send flowers to his wife. Now for me, that was one smart advertisement. And in the end, Schling went on to become one of the most famous flower businesses in New York.
So, and in the end, he became one of the most maybe famous florists in New York at that time. So it means that that is what happens at the end, and the sequence of event is maybe back to the starting time when he started up his business, and then what he did to become maybe famous and become successful. Okay, so that is maybe the sequence of the event, and I think that after listening it 3 times, we can maybe identify the phrases that the speaker used in the storytelling. So that is maybe the storytelling listening. Now, can you complete the story for me above? Look at maybe on the words in bold. You will never believe this. To cut a long story short, guess what happened? It turned out in the end, and then could you fill it in the blank? So 1 minute for you to fill in the blank. Okay, so now the whole class, can you tell me your matching? Yes, Thuy Sương.
I think number 1 is guess what happened.
Guess what happened? Okay.
Number 2 is in the end.
Number 2 is in the end. Okay.
Number 3 is to cut a long story short.
Okay, to cut a long story short. And number 4,
You'll never believe this.
you never believe this. Okay.
Number 5 is it turned out.
Number 5 is it turned out. Okay. So do you agree with Đương? Maybe you have other answer. Yes, Minh Đức.
I have different opinions. I agree with the first one. Guess what happened?
Mhm.
The second one is it turned out.
The second one is it turned out. Okay.
I agree with the third. To cut a long story short.
Mhm. And number 4?
Number 4, I am a bit confused because the next line put in the company, but I will fill in agree with her. You will never believe this.
You will never believe this. And then maybe not in the end, but maybe in the end should be number 5. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Minh Đức. Now, Phương Thảo, have you got the different idea or maybe the similar idea?
Turned out.
Thank you, Minh Đức. Okay, so Thảo, tell me your answer.
In my opinion, I must want and to cut a long story short.
So number 1 is to cut a long story short.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So number 1, you think that to cut a long story short.
And number 2, I must get what happened.
Number 2 is guess what happened. Number 2 is guess what happened. Okay.
And number 3, you will never believe this.
Okay, number 3, you will never believe this.
And number 4 is it turned out.
Number 4 is it turned out. And number 5 is in the end. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Phương Thảo. So it seems that you have maybe different version to tell a story. So I think that I will invite one of you to tell the story once again. Vậy bây giờ mời bạn sẽ kể lại câu chuyện nhá. Chỉ cần nhìn lên trên cái phần slide này, đọc theo đúng câu chuyện là chúng ta sẽ xem được là các bạn ấy làm có đúng hay không. Nào, mời một bạn kể lại cho cô câu chuyện này nào. Can anyone tell the story once again to the whole class? Yes, Thùy Dương.
Đọc theo đáp án của em là
Em làm theo đáp án của em thôi, nhưng mà nhớ là mình sẽ dừng lại ở một số các cái critical moments và mình sẽ thay đổi cái phần intonation của mình để cho phù hợp với câu chuyện nhá. Okay, so please.
Guess what happened to me at the weekend? I met this guy at the conference who I thought was really boring at first, but we got talking, and to cut a long story short, and in the end, I realized he was the very man I needed to meet. So the thing is that his company has been the victim of industrial espionage too, and has had all sorts of problems. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he explained how information gets out of an organization. You'll never believe this, but in their company, they did everything to discover how it happened, spent a lot of time and money, and so on. And it turned out that the problem was mobile phones, because, of course, modern ones have cameras in them, and no one had thought of it, and no one had thought of that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Thùy Dương. Okay, so in fact, I think that the version made by Thùy Dương is quite correct one. I think that maybe we have now let's check the answer with me. So I think that yes, what happened to me at the weekend. So I think that number 1 is here. Yes, what happened to me at the weekend? I met this guy at the conference who I thought was really boring at first, but we got talking. And so number 2, so some of you said that in the end, the others said that it turned out. So I think that in the end, I think that we don't put it in number number 2 because it might be necessary in number 5. So that's why, so number 2, I quite agree with someone said that it turned out. And it turned out I realized he was the very man I needed to meet. The thing is that his company has been the victim of industrial espionage too and has had all sorts of problems. Anyway, so number 3, most of you said that you will never believe this, and to cut a long story short, so I think that maybe number 3 here is to cut a long story short. So maybe number 3, to cut a long story short, he explained how information gets out of an organization. And number 4, I think that number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Number 4 is in the we have in the end, and you will never believe this. You will never believe this, but in their company they did everything to discover how it happened, spend a lot of time and money and so on, and you will never believe this, that the problem was. So I think that maybe we will have to focus on that one, you will never believe this, and in the end. So I might put in the end maybe number 4, you will never believe this, number 5, or maybe we can have maybe vice versa questions. So I think that maybe that is the suitable version for you to maybe complete the story. Or maybe we have another version, hoặc mình cũng có thể có cách thứ hai, vẫn là số 1, guess what happened. And number 2, maybe you said that to cut a long story short. And then number 3 is anyway, it turned out, maybe anyway it turned out, no, number 4. Cô nghĩ là chỉ có cái đáp án đầu tiên của bạn, chắc là đáp án đầu tiên là của bạn Dương à? Phải đáp án đầu tiên của Dương không nhỉ Dương?
You never believe this ạ.
Cái đầu tiên you will never believe this. Okay.
Em đáp câu đầu tiên của
Đáp
em
án
là
của Dương phải là guess what happened to me.
vâng.
Cái guess what happened to me là câu số 1 là đúng rồi nha. But we got talking and một số bạn thì chọn cái in the end là số 2, một số bạn thì chọn in the end là cái cuối cùng. Thế thì cái số 2 sẽ là in the end này. Cũng được này. Cái số 3 là to cut a long story short này. Số 4 là you will never believe this. Và cái số 5 là it turned out that, hóa ra là. Đúng chuẩn chưa? Bạn có tin được không? Ở trong doanh nghiệp đấy họ làm rất là nhiều thứ để tìm hiểu xem là chuyện đó đã diễn ra như thế nào, tốn rất là nhiều thời gian và tiền bạc vân vân. Nhưng hóa ra là cái vấn đề lại nằm ở chính điện thoại di động của các nhân viên sử dụng, bởi vì tất cả các điện thoại di động xịn thì đều có máy ảnh và không ai thì phát hiện ra điều đó. Okay, right? So that is maybe the story. Okay, that is your maybe your work that you have to do at home. So you can work in groups or you can work individually and think of something unusual that happened to you or to someone that you know, or think of a film or book, and then you will have to prepare maybe 1 or 2 minute story about it, and then you can maybe tell the story to the others. Vậy nhiệm vụ của chúng ta rất là đơn giản nhé. Dựa trên các cái technique và các cái phrases về storytelling này mà mình đã học này, các bạn có thể chuẩn bị cho cô, có thể là personal story, một câu chuyện của cá nhân này, có thể là một cuốn sách mà các bạn đã đọc này, có thể là nội dung của một bộ phim mà các bạn đã xem, mà cái nào các bạn cảm thấy thú vị thì các bạn dựa trên đó các bạn tóm tắt lại và kể lại cho cô thành một cái story, một cái cốt truyện mà các bạn thích. Và nhớ là chúng ta có tối đa 2 phút để kể câu chuyện này. Is that okay? So that is maybe about Unit 6. Vậy đây là bài số 6 mà chúng ta vừa mới học xong. Và trong bài số 6 này thì chúng ta đã có các cái câu hỏi liên quan đến phần speaking mà cô đã ra cho các bạn ở phần trên slide. Và các bạn có thể dựa trên đấy để làm thành các cái câu hỏi cho phần speaking của mình. Thì đấy là về phần bài 6 này. Thế thì hôm qua hôm qua thì cô có up ở trên nhóm hỏi ý kiến các bạn về việc là mình học online đến hết tuần này hay là mình học offline luôn từ thứ tư, bởi vì là chúng ta sẽ có bài 6 và chúng ta còn có bài 7 thôi. Thì cho cô hỏi lại một chút là vì cô cũng thấy các bạn vote ở trên đấy rồi, thì các em muốn là mình học online đến hết tuần này để cho nó xong bài 6 đi, xong rồi sang đến tuần sau thì sẽ triển khai học trực tiếp tại trường, thì cô và cô Hạnh sẽ hướng dẫn các bạn giải đáp các thắc mắc này, ôn tập này, xem có những vấn đề gì mà chúng ta chưa trả lời được thì chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau hướng dẫn và thực hành luôn ở trên lớp. Thì như vậy có được không? Hay là thứ tư này thì các bạn lên học offline luôn? Thì ý lớp mình như thế nào các em?
Học hết tuần này online đi cô, tại vì em thấy cô kế toán tài chính cũng cho học hết tuần này.
Cô Tuyến cũng cho học hết tuần này ấy gì?
Vâng ạ.
Rồi ok. Thế cho câu hỏi là hiện giờ là lớp mình là đa phần các bạn vẫn đang ở nhà. Có bạn nào đã lên Hà Nội chưa?
Có một số bạn vẫn đang ở nhà ấy, cô.
Có một số bạn vẫn đang ở nhà. Thế thì nếu mà đến tuần sau mà các bạn lên Hà Nội thì có kịp chuẩn bị không các em? Có bị cập dập không? Lớp mình
Có mấy bạn kiểu mang hết đồ về quê ấy cô.
có mấy bạn mang hết đồ về quê, tức là bây giờ nếu mà mình quay trở lại trường thì là mình sẽ phải vác đồ hết từ dưới nhà lên, tức là nó cũng khá nhiều đồ đúng không?
Vâng ạ.
Ờ, thế thì chắc là mình cứ thống nhất là mình sẽ học online đến hết tuần này nhá. Thì cô với cô Hạnh sẽ cố gắng đẩy tiến độ nhanh một chút để mình có thể học xong bài 7 đi. Sau đó là mình sẽ túc tắc cái phần nội dung ôn tập rồi giải đáp các thắc mắc cho tuần sau và tuần sau nữa. Bởi vì cái học phần này nó sẽ kết thúc vào ngày như cô nhìn lịch ở đây là ngày 26 tháng 11, tức là mình cũng chỉ còn có 2 tuần nữa thôi. Thì 2 cái tuần đấy mình có thể giãn cách nó ra một chút để đến trường để mình học cũng được. Thế cho các bạn thoải mái nhá. Được chưa ạ? Ok không
Vâng
các
ạ.
em? Như vậy là nếu mà chúng ta có học á thì chúng ta cũng sẽ nếu mà học offline nhá, trực tiếp thì sớm nhất thì mới là đến thứ tư tuần sau là chúng ta mới gặp nhau đúng không? Bởi vì là cô nhìn lịch thì là chúng ta học online vào thứ hai và chúng ta sẽ học offline vào thứ tư và thứ sáu đúng không nào?
Vâng ạ.
Thế thì lịch học online thì chúng ta sẽ học nốt tuần này cho đến hết thứ hai tuần sau nhá. Xong rồi hội trường ID Zoom như thế nào thì cô sẽ check lại lịch, xong rồi cô sẽ báo lại trên nhóm lớp của lớp mình nhá các em.
Vâng.
Thế thì buổi ngày hôm nay là thứ nhất là về các bạn chuẩn bị cho cô sẵn một cái bài storytelling như thế này để buổi sau chúng ta sẽ thực hành cái cách storytelling là một này. Tuần này thì hôm nay học cô này, thứ tư thì chúng ta sẽ học cô Hạnh nhá, để cô tìm lại xem là cái ID Zoom nào phù hợp, xong rồi cô sẽ báo lại ID Zoom cho lớp mình buổi hôm đấy nhá.
Vâng.
Ok chưa ạ? Rồi ok, thì hôm nay mình nghỉ sớm một chút xíu nhá. Chúc các bạn bữa trưa vui vẻ. Bye bye.
Em chào cô ạ.
Cô chào các em.
Em chào cô ạ.
Cô chào các em.